So when I first heard that Fallout London was finished and ready to go, I believe I was cautiously optimistic about it. That's because it joins a handful of total conversion mods that blur the line between being a game mod and being a full indie game in its own right. The Nameless mod, Enderal, and now Fallout London are completely original stories and settings based on pre-existing RPGs, and what separates it from being a standalone game is mainly semantic and legal. That said, as I've played more of this, I've noticed more of its flaws, and after nearly a year of very little news, I think it's time I scrutinize this a bit more closely and openly. The London team almost immediately established their own company after release, which means that you shouldn't be treating this as a mod anymore, but as an unusual full indie game that's their opening portfolio piece. That kind of idea leads to higher standards and less forgiveness in some areas, and with some reviews that say that this is better than New Vegas or Fallout 4, it makes me think that there's some kind of naiveness involved in overconfidence from both the team and some of the fans, especially since they're selling plushies now for some reason. So, in this video, I figured I'd go over a few broad concepts and specific mechanics, and see how they fare in comparison to other games, especially Fallout itself in its design. Now, the way that I like to analyze a game world is to begin by looking at the broad scope of the game and how you move through the world map. What kind of locations do you go to? What kind of fast travel points do you tag? And is there room left behind as you travel in order to leave room for side quests? And I figured I would go over two games first before going on to Fallout London, just so you have a sense of how I actually look at the actual open world map. Now, for Fallout New Vegas, or all of the Fallouts, and most storytelling in general, it follows a 3-act structure. I'm going to be color coding that. So in Fallout New Vegas, you start here in Good Springs, and as you venture out and go finish the tutorial area, you're given a choice on whether you want to go left or right. And the intended route is to actually go right and do a bit of a grand loop around the game world like so, following the highways and roads. As you go along this path, you also run into a number of settlements which act as small hub and spoke models, where you have the NCR outpost here with a couple of side quests. You run into Novak here with another side quest here, which is indicated to be a bit mandatory. Then you go up here to the trading post, where you can find Veronica, and then you loop all the way up to the entrance to New Vegas and to your target, Benny himself. For Act 2, your destination actually becomes your new hub, and throughout Act 1, you've ended up tagging a lot of fast travel points to actually make the entire world your oyster. There are still a couple of remaining zones that you don't explore, but if you ended up taking left, you actually have an alternative benefit of actually tagging these places instead. Otherwise, for Act 2, you start here, and then you end up exploring pretty much to all of the remaining corners, taking advantage of fast travel ideally. So you go to the Boomers by fast traveling to a nearby point here, you go back to the trading post. If you desire, you can actually fast travel to somewhere around to the southeast corner of the map, and go moving your way forward to the Caesar's Legion base. And this significantly shortens the amount of backtracking and travel that you need to do because you've ended up tagging all of these fast travel points. Now, unfortunately, New Vegas had its budget cut down, so Act 3 is actually quite short. When you're ready to go, you simply talk to whoever is handling your Act 2, since there are faction choices, and you get teleported straight to Hoover Dam, which is over here. And in a previous video, I went over the way you flowed through this world, and I found it to be quite brilliant, because Act 1 seems quite linear, but it's actually setting up a ton of fast travel points to let you backtrack and travel across the whole world more quickly. It's kind of akin to getting like your airship in Final Fantasy, except that's not a thing here. Now, for Fallout 4, it ends up being a little bit more streamlined, following a more straight hub and spoke model, where you begin at the top left corner of the map at Sanctuary, and you go to your first settlement. Then you more or less make a beeline towards Diamond City, which is essentially your first spoke, and then Diamond City becomes your hub. After that, you branch out from Diamond City to do a number of small side quests, such as retrieving Nick Valentine, and then going on to Fort Hagen here. Act 2 has Diamond City essentially act still as your hub, where you go out and make contact with the railroad around here, and then returning to Diamond City, going out to the airport and meeting the Brotherhood of Steel, and then also going all the way past the boundaries of the game map and meeting a couple of contacts in the Glowing Sea. You also end up investigating the location of the Institute. Act 3 then essentially has you picking a faction and fulfilling some of their side quest tasks, and then setting up a teleporter and raiding the Institute headquarters, which is around here. It's put here on the game map, but it's actually in a secret underground base. And this is essentially the main quest line of Fallout 4. You can see that there's a lot of unexplored room here, which means that a lot of this area is actually a bit sparse, but there's also a lot of room for you to explore freely and do lots of side quests. Now, when looking over this again, this actually did surprise me at first, because this means that there's actually a lot of areas that you don't really need to explore, particularly the north and southern parts. And, well, that kind of lines up with how less developed they are. A huge amount of the game's main story takes place pretty much within the Boston area, and everything else is really just going out from there to do a small side quest. So, for example, you go out here to do Nick Valentine's quest and whatnot. So now that I've kind of shown how a couple of the previous Fallouts worked and how you traveled through the game world, let's take a look at how Fallout London's quest flow is kind of a bit of a mess. So this is the entire game world map, and there are actually 4 subworlds, which are kind of the size of DLCs themselves. Not to mention that the world's rotated for some reason. So like these 2 maps here and here are actually rotated by 34 degrees, and this is rotated by 45, which throws off your compass completely. That's kind of why in my custom UI mod I just disabled the north-south indicators. Now, Fallout London has you begin with a train crash and 2 serious debuffs that you need to do the main quest to cure. Now, you start at around here, which is kind of near the middle of the map. And once you go forward just a little bit, you're faced with a mandatory choice to go either left or right. Now, this mandatory dialogue choice is with a gang member, and if you go right, you end up joining their gang, who seems to offer help, and going left is towards a settlement, which seems to be neutral, but with possibly more medical help. Now, my first impression when I played this for the first time is that this dialogue is unskippable, and it implies that these 2 faction choices were going to widely diverge and yet meet back at the same point, a bit similar to the Nameless mod, and it also made me think of New Vegas, which going left offered an optional shortcut. However, this is actually a false dichotomy, which you can't actually skip. So if you decide to go right and follow the gang, you end up going in this direction here. And then you end up going south to the gang's hideout. Then, you're immediately dropped like a rock, and everyone changes personality.
Ace, we could use an extra pair of hands.
Font's gone, and he was the one with the medical know-how.
I've got no time for the detritus right now.
And bring me this stupid radio anyway.
The only available doctor is one of the gang's medics who heals one of your debuffs, but otherwise you're pretty much immediately sent to do a small series of fetch quests around this area, and then you're sent up here to the rival gang. Then you pretty much proceed to do a bit of a back and forth along this single line, where you keep going back to base and doing a number of sabotages. Then that's it. So this isn't actually connected to the main quest at all, even though you can't skip the offer for the quest. This is where the side quest ends, and the only way to continue it is to actually continue the main quest. There is no cure for your second perk if you do this, and you end up burning about 10 hours of gameplay time with a serious damage debuff. If you are to go left towards the first settlement, Thames Haven, you end up going in this direction here, and you do end up meeting a doctor as well, which removes one of your 2 debuffs. Then this briefly becomes a small hub, and then you enter London proper and go deeper and deeper into this another settlement here. And then you keep following the trail of clues, which sends you further and further east, which meets back here. And you only really briefly visit this place in the main quest, and if you ignore the game quest line, there's really no interaction here. You really just go into a random side room. After that, you learn that you need to obtain a gas mask, which is around this area here. So you end up backtracking. You're not really sent back to a hub. So Sanctuary, which is this location here, does not actually serve as a quest hub, but it is a convenient fast travel point. After which you go south here, and then you backtrack and go back here to obtain that gas mask. Then you would fast travel back again, and then you make use of your gas mask by actually crossing a giant wall and entering a separate world space, which is this area here. Now it's a little bit confusing since the map is rotated, but you end up following that a little bit, crossing over to this region, which is another separate DLC-sized map, following that, and then you end up exiting that into a secret area here, where you finally get your second debuff removed. And this is the only way for you to remove your second debuff. After that, you are told to explore London as a whole and directed towards Westminster, which is this other separate area, which is again over here. As you can see here, with just Act 1, you end up really exploring little of the map, and you don't really tag a lot of fast travel points. And the fast travel points are very convoluted. From here, we go on to Act 2. And Act 2 is really about gathering 4 different signatures in order to enter Buckingham Palace, which is here. Now this, again, doesn't really serve as a hub because even though there is a marketplace, there's no player home or base or anything like that. Now, in order to gain those 4 signatures, you need to go to 4 different regions on the map and essentially complete their entire quest line to get the signature from the leader. You can bypass this by just stealing the signature, but you still need to go to that location. Now, the 4 locations for the signatures are in these locations here. You've already passed through 2 of those locations. One of them is this area here, so you need to essentially backtrack all the way back there and finish the entire quest line in there in order to have a positive signature. And then you also need to go to this region here, which is another long quest line. Then you need to go to this region here, which you've really never made contact with before now, but again, there's a very long series of quest lines where you try to gain reputation within that region just to gain that signature. And then finally, your 4th signature is in this region here, which is Croydon. Now, for this bottom settlement here, you can see that it's actually really far away from any kind of fast travel point you've acquired. Even this one here, which requires you to actually do a lot of traversal. There are nearby fast travel points to these top 3, but that only lets you start the quest line. Not only that, but in the quest lines themselves, one of the required tasks that you need to do for this area up here requires you to go all the way here. And one of the quest lines that you need to do for this area requires you to go all the way here. Which, again, leads to a lot of traveling with no nearby fast travel point. The end result of this, I think, is that you end up kind of forgetting the purpose of Act 2, because all of these regions are actually really self-contained storylines. It's almost as if these were made by 4 different sets of people because of how independent they are. Not only that, but 3 of these regions are in separate maps. It's almost as if you went to 3 or 4 different DLC locations in New Vegas and then went back into New Vegas to advance the main story. And this can take an incredibly long amount of time, which kind of leads me to just forgetting about the main story to begin with. Now keep in mind, this is not me highlighting side quests. This is purely the main story. For these 4 regions where you get signatures from, These are largely independent regions where you can actually finish their entire quest line separately, and that gives you instant access to the signatures. But you still need to go to these regions regardless. For these two regions in particular, they're also so far away from your main quest path that you're really not guaranteed to run into them by accident. The end result is really a long series of unrelated journeys, all for the sake of getting signatures to enter Buckingham Palace, which really does lead to a bit of fatigue. Now this leads us to Act 3, which is kind of so much of a tangent that it almost feels like it's a new storyline, because once you enter Buckingham Palace, you're given a choice of 3 factions in following their quest lines, and the 3 factions are located here, here, and this entire region here, which we've never traversed to so far. And these factions, 2 of these factions, actually come out of nowhere, and I've seen several reviews that point out that these really do come out of nowhere. There's no association with any of the 4 independent regions you had to get signatures from, and this is where the actual turf war and conflict over London actually starts. For the most part, before this point, before you reach Act 3, all of these other factions and these territories that are marked in green here are actually independent and stable. Like, they're comfortable with the status quo and they're not really conflicting with each other at all. It's really once you get to this final point here where you start dealing with Camelot and the 5th column, as well as the secret lab. This reminds me so much of the issues that came about with The Witcher 3 and how convoluted and lengthy the movement through the world was for that. It was so convoluted and lengthy that 3D Projekt Red actually decided to shorten the game length of Cyberpunk, because after gaining statistics for The Witcher 3, they learned that even though The Witcher 3 was a great game, there were huge numbers of people who actually got tired and actually giving up on it because it was too long. And this is an issue that I see here with Fallout London. The sheer number of lines here that I'm drawing for Fallout London, just to make it clear, is not me highlighting side quests. It's actually me highlighting everything you need to do for the main quest in finishing the main storyline, which is a stark contrast to New Vegas, which leaves lots of gaps for you to explore, as well as Fallout 4, which leaves even bigger gaps between the main quest paths for you to explore, to do side questing and random exploration. For Fallout London, you're actually required to traverse to all of these optional areas, and in order to progress, you're given really no option other than to actually do those side quests themselves, or just kill everyone and bypass it. Even if you want to try to get these signatures quickly by forging them or stealing them, you still need to go to these distant areas of the map, which leads to an extremely long game. Now, for some people, this can end up being a fun experience, but as I said with my Witcher example, this led to an extremely high attrition rate and people weren't even finishing the game to begin with. And that can lead to a cascade of other issues, like in the later parts of the game, just not being as well playtested, as well as the amount of effort put into those latter portions just being less because it's not worth putting effort into it. After all, if only 10% of your players actually make it to the final act and dealing with Camelot and all that, well, what's the point of putting resources into it? Not to mention, on release, one of these region maps were broken, forcing everyone to give this faction the bad ending and use the backup option to continue unless you waited a couple more months for the next patch. It makes you wonder how many playtesters even reached the halfway point, or tried every quest option. If this was an actual full game that's limited by the budget, you need to make these trade-offs and cut down the scope. All in all, I hope this broad comparison shows how Fallout London is ultimately a loose, messy collection of disconnected stories. In Act 1, you immediately meet one faction, and it's strongly implied that you need to choose a side right now. But this is a false dichotomy, since only one choice progresses the main story. In Act 2, your goal is to gain access to a single building. To do so, you travel to 4 corners of the game map to complete 4 isolated faction story arcs. These are all self-contained, and there's no crossover or conflict between them. The only available skip is to go there anyway and hunt for some hidden backup items in the event of failure. Then, in Act 3, you finally get a faction choice, but it's between 2 new groups in another corner of the world. There's no common thread from the previous acts that feed into the final storyline. What you get then is the illusion of a large expansive world, but there's no interconnection. There's form, but no function. And because these are strung together to give an appearance of a 3-act structure, you can't skip forward or explore them out of order. It's an omnibus. War never changes, and yet most of the factions you meet only have internal conflicts instead of conflicts with each other. There's no kettle about to boil over, such as in Fallout 3, New Vegas, or Fallout 4. Going into that level of detail, though, and examining specific cases of story and mechanics is probably something I need to fit into another video. I'm running a bit long here, but my main takeaway is this. There's a lot more that could have been done to improve the quest flow and pacing and non-linearity of the world of Fallout London. But until then, I hope you found something interesting in this breakdown. If you did, do be sure to like and subscribe, as well as share your own thoughts in the comments or on Discord. Every bit of feedback really helps me figure out where to go next. So, until next time.